This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication. Welcome to this episode of Truth Be Told. Have you ever wondered how police obtained sketches of suspects and turn them over to the media? Well, our guest today, Gil Zamora, is going to dive into that process and more. Gil is a forensic sketch artist who has interviewed well over 3,000 eyewitnesses for crimes ranging from indecent exposure to murder. Gil retired from the San Jose Police Department in 2011, has developed his own interview methodology, compositure, and his interviews and sketches have helped solve several hundred investigations. Gil has been recognized as an expert forensic artist in various criminal cases. He was a senior instructor for the state of California, and he's published a book, which we're going to dive into, called The Mindful Interview Method. Gil is now a highly sought after instructor, a keynote speaker, and a consultant. We're going to explore all of that, Gil's current career, and how you can become a better interviewer or even just a better listener from the perspective of a forensic sketch artist. Let's dive into the conversation now. Welcome to this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast. I'm your host, Dave Thompson, and I'm here with my friend Gil Zamora. How you doing today, Gil?
Hey, Dave. Nice to see you. Great to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. Gil has become a master of a whole bunch of things between interviewing, being a sketch artist, being a professor, being a baseball umpire. I just learned, and keeping yourself busy these days.
Oh yeah, you know that they tell you when you retire from police work, you got to keep busy. So my love for baseball has always been there, and so when I had a little free time, I went out there and I trained and learned, and now I'm enjoying my life being out on the field all the time. Love it.
Yeah, that's the way. That's the way to do it. I'm sure you. It wouldn't hurt to have a pair of handcuffs with you once in a while when these parents get out of control. But we can save another episode.
Luckily, that has not happened for me. I go back to officer presence. That's usually what works. And so luckily, and also my interviewing skills, being able to talk to people usually helps me out most of the time.
Yeah, and that's perfect segue to really what these episodes are about, and this specific discussion is kind of how interviewing has played a role in a variety of different aspects of careers or personal life. And so I guess to get us going, listeners heard a little bit about your background, but maybe kind of walk through how you got into law enforcement and what your role was there, and then what you're doing now.
Yeah. So just briefly, I joined the police department in 1985. I was just like, for those of your law enforcement audience out there, I'm sure they thought, hey, I'm going to change the community. I'm going to give back to where I was growing up, and I want to protect people and put the bad people in jail. So there I was doing engineering before, electrical engineering, drafting in the office. And then I thought I would love to be out there in that police car, driving around and doing fun things. So I joined and was marching around. I thought this was amazing. It was fun. And then I heard this story that said that there was some guy in the police department that was drawing all the time. And I went, what is that? And at the time when I was in the academy, I was always drawing. So one of the veteran guys came up to me and said, hey, one day you might want to be the police artist. And I go, what? So that was the first time that I found out that they were actually paying somebody to draw at the police department. And what happened as I got on the police department, unfortunately for me, a drunk driver made a left turn in front of me while I was going to a call, got in an accident, and changed my life. But I was always drawing, and I met him, and we got along pretty well. He told me what to do and what not to do, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to be the next police artist. So I trained in that, and the rest is history.
Yeah, what a neat two different fields that I think people don't realize have such an intersection of your artistic talent and then communication talent to kind of cross over. I'm curious about the training process for that. So,
oh yeah,
I mean, that's like art.
That's a good point. As a matter of fact, having the creative in a paramilitary organization was always something that people were going, wow, that's a weird situation to have within the department. But it really worked because the folks in law enforcement thinking about the suspect, thinking about how to solve the crime, were already accustomed to utilizing this creative, I'm going to call it creative force, that kind of helped them to think outside of the box when they were trying to solve crimes. Um, but to the training, unfortunately, I will tell you this, that there's two sides of it, right? There's the psychology of interviewing, and then there's the actual drawing itself. And while I already had some of the drawing in my background, I definitely didn't have the experience of actually drawing someone's face through interviews. And so I actually had to train with a portrait artist. His name was Bob Gerbrack. He was pretty famous out here in the Bay Area. And the city, actually, when I approached them to help me with some training, they said, okay, we'll let you take this one-on-one course with him. It was 6 months, 3 times a week, I believe 3 or 4 times a week. I would drive up to San Francisco from San Jose, and I would basically do one-on-one with this portrait artist. We would have models come in, and I would be asked to draw portraits of these people at the direction of my mentor, Bob Gerbrack, who was kind of beating me in the head. This is how you do it. This is what you need to do. Tom had actually done that before. Tom Macris, the police artist before me, he was the first in the history of the police department. I was the second. And that was the training I received for the drawing aspect. Interestingly enough, the interview itself was less than, I would say, less than robust, because
Right.
most of it was hands-on. It was just, okay, Gil, watch me do my interviews. And I would watch, and I would sit there and draw along as he was drawing and interviewing the eyewitness. That was basically my training in interviewing eyewitnesses about sketching. I
Yeah.
can add that I did that for about a year and a half, and then I was sent to the FBI. They had a composite art course, and their main thrust for interviewing was based on the cognitive interview. That's when I first got introduced to the concepts of the cognitive interview technique. And when I went there, what was interesting, and I talk about this in my book that I wrote, that the head of the group, the head of the composite art program, his name was Horace Effner, really nice man. He went around the room and said, okay, these are all the people in this class. And then he stopped on me and he said, this is Gil Zamora. He's from San Jose. You guys should take every opportunity during your breaks to talk to him about what they are doing over there. That was
Hmm.
the first time I realized, oh my God, wow. So I'm thinking that there was not a lot of training going on with me back in San Jose, and it turned out that we were doing something that they were considering advanced,
You set the
which blew my
standard,
mind.
apparently.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
what Tom was telling me at the time was, hey, we got to watch out for contaminating people's memory. And the way he did that was to say, um, we can't show people, we can't suggest things based on their selection, because at the time the FBI was saying, hey, in order to stimulate memory, you need to show reference images. The reference images
Right.
are people with faces. Sometimes their eyes are blacked out, their nose, and so forth. And they would look through the catalog and then identify certain faces that reminded them of their suspect. Well, we were doing something similar, but we were using actual mugshots of people that had been arrested in Santa Clara County. And we weren't blocking out eyes or nose or anything like that. We were just showing them. And the people would go through there, and Tom would say, okay, pick out 3 images that remind you of your suspect. And then they would pick those 3, and then we would create the sketch from that. But we were doing that in addition to actually asking them questions about the suspect's face. So it was a little bit different. The FBI model was very structured, whereas they would ask the eyewitness to view the images, these reference images, mark them all down, and then the artist would then sketch those images, and then they would show the eyewitness the images, and then they would work together to come up with the final sketch. So I would say that the actual, training for, I'm going to quote, uh, eyewitness interviewing was very limited, very limited. As a matter of fact, if I could just say one thing, when I asked Horace, I said, Horace, you're not talking a lot about eyewitness memory contamination. You're not talking about issues like that we were talking about at San Jose with Tom and I. And he said, well, Gil, all I can tell you is this is as the FBI, we have to train for multiple audiences, meaning different levels of proficiency in drawing, different levels of proficiency in understanding how to interview people, and so we have to train them at a level where, okay, everybody can be on this page. He goes, if we were to try to give them something more advanced, it would be more difficult for us to kind of push it out to all the audiences. Now, this was back in 1994, 93, so maybe hopefully things have changed. I don't know.
Sure.
But that was the answer he gave me because I just couldn't understand why they weren't looking at the psychology of human memory, the issues that were going on back then, and not incorporating it in their training or interviewing exercises.
Yeah, and I think that we've seen that consistently, whether it's a basic recruit or patrol academy or detective academy, or just interviewing altogether. The training has been minimal, which I know is something you've been focused on a lot recently. And you started to kind of allude to this, and there's probably a lot of people listening that have never had the opportunity, other than watching Law and Order, to see what a sketch artist even does or what some of the issues might be. I'm picturing, me doing it. I just have a bunch of stick figures and they'd all look the same. So I clearly have a talent gap there. But you referenced your book, and I've got it in front of me. So if for those of you listening, it's The Mindful Interview Method, Retrieving Cognitive Evidence. If you're watching, I got it up on the screen, my notes of some of the highlight reel for me. And you kick off the book, and I know in a lot of your presentations, to kind of demonstrate what are some of the common problems on how our memory works and how the interviewer kind of retrieves that information. And you describe kind of this exercise you do where you might have a couple hundred people in a room describing a feature and you're trying to sketch it. And maybe you can expand on what that looks like and what the results have been from that.
Yeah, that idea came from reading a lot of research about the fallibility of human memory. And what I want audiences to understand, especially when they're inviting me to speak about, forensic art and how we do what we do, right? I wanted them to understand that it's about the exchange of information. And regardless of what information I'm getting, I'm still interpreting what it is that they're saying. So as I would go around the room, and usually it's a, conference room, a couple hundred people, and I'm just picking people at random. And when you hear them exchange the idea of what the feature would look like, just making it up out of thin air, the whole idea of putting those features together in one sketch really impresses the audience. They go, wow, that actually looks like somebody, right? So that's one part of it. But what I want to share with the audience is that listen to the way I'm asking you the question. And then every once in a while, I'm going to show you how I can manipulate that information. And they were blown away. They were like, wow, that sounded like you were just being, extra cautious, very, detective like, and you're trying to dig more. And I would tell them, well, that's the difference between me accepting the information that's limited from your memory versus me actually shaping that information to what maybe I'm thinking about that the suspect might look like. So, an example I would say, the perfect one is always the hair. Hey, tell me about the hair. And they say, well, yeah, it's kind of short, kind of dark. And then I might go, I would tell them, well, was it like a crew cut or was it like a perm or something really tight? And then they would think about it and they go, well, maybe it was like a crew cut. And then I would stop. I said, did you see what I just did right there? And most of the audience would go, what? I go, I just shaped their recollection. Initially, their authentic recollection was just short hair. Because here's the thing, most people, that's all maybe that they remember. And the moment that I say, hey, give them a binary choice, well, they're making a choice because there's two dynamics going on in this particular collaboration, right? They want to please me as the artist. They want to help solve the case. So they're looking to me as being the expert, and they're saying, well, he must know that it would be either one of these choices. So then they kind of go back and say, okay, that's what I think. But what I learned in reading the research on human memory is that it's an act of recreation. They're looking back on what it is that they remember. And then based on who is asking the question, how they're accessing their memory can be altered. And so the audience starts looking at that going, oh my God, yeah, I see what you mean. I said, instead of coming up with the sketch that actually represents what the person actually remembered, which is pretty limited, sometimes very archetypical. Um, Instead, we get a sketch that is more detailed and has more information because I have now altered it. And the audience is just blown away. They're just kind of like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, I see what's happening. So it helps
Well,
the
yeah.
interviewers to kind of look at that and go, oh, I see why I'm thinking that I'm actually digging for more, but I'm actually shaping the information.
And as you're saying that, I'm thinking I can picture that in a room full of investigators, other sketch artists, interviewers, but even just lay people, right? I'm thinking of you going out to dinner with a friend or family member, and they're describing a new person they just met or somebody they bumped into, and they're trying to describe to you what they look like. And I know a lot of times, well, they kind of got hair like this actress, or their face kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of this actor or some other celebrity. Or do you see a lot of that when you're engaging with people where they're using like a known face to try to describe something? And does that make it worse? Does that contaminate their memory of how you perceive that?
No, actually, that's a really good point because think about it. That is more authentic, and what I mean by that is, I, as the interviewer, am not shaping that. They're giving me that
Right.
information. Now it relies on me to go. Okay, do I know that actor? Do I know that celebrity? Do I know that person that they are saying it looks like them? Right. So yeah, that is definitely helpful, especially if it's coming from them organically, not where I'm shaping the information. And if I could just touch on, I was looking at the heuristics involved in training forensic artists. So how are they being trained to create the sketch? So if you think about it, when we were in our training, we were looking at images that we can kind of copy. If you put an artist in front of a picture and say, okay, draw that hair, draw that nose that you're seeing right now, that's very easy to do. And you think
Right.
about it, that was the heuristics they were using to teach forensic artists to draw the face, the human face. Well, they're saying to them, hey, you're going to be tasked with having to draw different eyes, nose, ears, mouth, right? So this was the model that they would use to create those composite sketches. Well, unfortunately, what has happened is they've taken that heuristic and hung on to it in the actual interviews with eyewitnesses, not understanding that that actual process may actually be contaminating their memory.
Hmm.
But there's a disconnect right now that's going on with many of these sketch artists where they're not understanding they need to let that go and now just rely on their proficiency to draw the human face in addition to being an excellent interviewer.
Yeah, and that's again, as you're saying that, I'm thinking if somebody were to describe another person to me, and maybe it's just again, it could be an interview or it could just be an interaction, and they say, "Oh, this real big guy came into the store," or "I met this person. He had a kind of crazy hair." Right? These subjective terms like real big guy, crazy hair. What I'm when I hear big guy, that to me means bigger than me. Right? When I hear crazy, that's probably
Right.
relative to what I think is normal. And so, I'm assuming that's on the interviewer to try to expand on that versus you take what big guy, and all of a sudden you interpret that as what you assume big to mean.
Yeah, no, great point. In my mindful interview technique, excuse me, I'm assessing everything. And what I mean by that, the moment I meet that person, I'm looking at who they are, how they're dressed, how they're doing, all that, because that all comes into play when I'm interacting with them. So, for instance, I meet you, like you say, you're a big guy, right? I see that. What, you're very coiffed and all that, the beard, the hair. Now you say something, hey, the guy's big. Well, like you said, I'm going to assume you know what a big guy is. So I'm going to use that information to at least start out with a sketch. Remember that part of the sketch interview is I'm interviewing you and then coming up with a sketch that is, I would say, 90% done based on the interview itself. There's going to be a moment in the sketch interview where I'm actually going to show you the sketch and ask you to tell me whether we're in the ballpark or not. So my interpretation of what you're saying is a big guy versus what I've drawn may change once you look at it. You're going to make
Hmm.
that adjustment on that information so that we can kind of get to this point where now you look at it and now you say, yes, that reminds me of him. So, oh yeah, I'm taking in everything from the way they're talking, from the way they're holding themselves seated or not. Are they fidgeting? Are they concerned? Are they getting emotional? Most of the cases that I've done are only felony crimes of violent crimes, sexual assault. So if you can imagine, there's a lot of emotion going on in those interviews. So I
Sure.
have to be very empathetic about what I'm asking, how I'm asking, and more importantly, what they may have gone through in order to kind of reveal this information to me.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. Is understanding what's their perspective of it might alter your outcome from your perspective of the interview. And for people that are just listening and not watching, when Gil said I'm a big guy, he of course was referring to being muscular and fit and not overweight in any means. I'm
Of
sure,
course, of course,
of
of
course.
course.
But it actually, when you said that, I know you had you've had a lot of neat things in your career, and one of the first ways that I kind of encountered you was through the Dove Real Beauty sketches, and have seen a video that was put out. I think it's well over 150 million views at this point, I'm sure, across the globe. And I'll let you expand on what that was. But one of my takeaways was just the difference between how we might perceive ourselves versus how other people perceive us, and then what that looks like when you're describing it to somebody like you, and you had a
Yeah,
chance to kind of sketch both versions of that. So maybe you can expand on that. And I thought that was just a really cool project and some neat insight.
yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. It was an amazing project for me. Um, it was out of the blue. I was nearing the end of. I just retired in 2011, and then out of the blue, in a December 2012, I think I received an email from some um, uh, marketing company out of Brazil, and it was just a random email. And I would get different requests throughout the years, and they said, "Hey, can you sign this NDA agreement?" And I was like, "Why? What is going on?" Well, we
Uh-oh.
can't talk to you unless you do this. And I went, "All right, I'll go for it." So I signed it. They sent it, and they send me this packet that has my name, my picture. I'm seated drawing something, and it's these headlines, forensic artist interviews real women. I was like, whoa, they'd put a lot of energy on this. And basically, what they had said is they had their marketing teams from across the country, excuse me, the world, London, Brazil, New York, and they were the winners of this group where they wanted to show how real women saw themselves. They had done this amazing survey across the world, and they found that women were pretty harsh on the way they were thinking about themselves. And when compared to what other people thought, they thought that they weren't as harsh as they were thinking about themselves, to put it another way. And they thought, hey, wouldn't it be a great idea to have a sketch artist interpret what they're thinking about themselves and what other people are thinking? And so they apparently looked all around the world, finding different sketch artists because that was the idea. And they settled upon me and they said, we think that you can do this. And I can tell you right now that I think one of the reasons, and we talked about it later when I got the project, is that they felt that because I wasn't using reference images, because I wasn't so
Mhm.
tied with actually saying, hey, is this it or versus that, and more interview, they felt that I could actually do this. And so I sort of agreed with them. I will tell you this, when they told me in December they wanted to film in January, and I said, I need to make sure that you are going to be happy with the product that I'm going to create. And what I mean by that
Right.
is I knew what I needed to do as a criminal sketch artist, right? I knew that the level of realism as far as a sketch goes about a suspect was a low bar to hit for me as a criminal forensic artist. And what I mean by that is we just need something that reminds the audience in general of what the suspect looked like. Making that connection is pretty easy for people out in the public or law enforcement agencies, law enforcement officers. I didn't know what they were going to be looking for when it comes to my sketches in regards to this project. So I said, the only way I'll do it is if we practice one one interview. I want to see what that's going to look like. And so I said, we need to do that before I commit. And they said, okay. So they flew down to San Francisco. It was nearby San Jose, and they had a witness who was going to describe somebody she had just met. The way they wanted to do this is I was never going to meet the eyewitness. We're going to be back to back on a chair, and I was just going to interview them. So, one, I've never done that before. Two,
Mhm.
I'm usually drawing male suspects, but now they were focused on female subjects. So that was going to be different. So I went ahead and walked into this really cool little San Francisco boutique hotel. The chair was there waiting for me. This person was on the other side, couldn't see them. They were filming this whole thing just to make sure that they were going to capture all the information. I sat there, introduced myself, and I just went to town like I normally do. Thousands of interviews, right? Just went right through it, did the sketch. I said, okay, take care of yourself. I got up, walked out into the other room. So it was about 40 minutes. And when I got to that room, I was met with the marketing team, and they were all high fiving each other. They were congratulating me. And I said, what? They go, this is going to work because you don't know who she just described, and we do, and you hit it out of the park. And I was like, okay, fine. I mean, I thought it was the normal thing that I do, without interacting and having the eyewitness change things, right? So okay, you're okay with this level of representation, or my perspective on what they look like. Fine. So that was it. I mean, we set up the film, and I did, I think it was 22 interviews with people. They had them for 2 days, kind of sequestered in an area where they couldn't see me and I couldn't see them. One of the things that I altered, while you're asking about this, is that they wanted to work with people that knew the other person. So, for instance, the random person I would be interviewing them about someone they knew, and I
Okay.
said, if I sit in a room to do that, I'm going to feel like something's going on. And what I meant by that is, as I'm asking questions, it's more authentic for me when I'm hearing them describe somebody that they've never seen before, that they don't know, if that makes any sense. So I
Sure.
feel like I was going to be in a situation where if I'm hearing them describe somebody that they know, it wouldn't be the same for me. And I don't know if I would be able to produce what I think is a good enough sketch. So they kind of went back and forth with me, and they go, okay, this is going to be harder, but all right, we're going to find random people and just see what happens. And so that's what they did. And, the rest is history. The one funny thing at the end is that they had this thing. I was just going to do the sketch and that's it. I'm in there, out. I was just a forensic artist. That's what I thought. And
Mhm.
then in the end of the second day of shooting, they wanted this scene where I was walking with the eyewitness and the producer, the head person there. And all three of us would walk up to the sketch, and I was just there just to be there. I don't know why, but the the producer was the one to say, okay, what do you think about the sketch? She was going to talk about it with the person. And then this one time I said something to the eyewitness, and we had a connection because obviously I was there with her. First time I'm meeting her. And all of a sudden they go, cut. And they bring me out, they bring us out. They have this huge meeting in the back. And now the producer comes back to me. She says, okay, they like you better than me. So I'm going to be out. So you're going to be now the person that brings the eyewitness there and talks to them. And speaking like an interviewer, like yourself, you build a rapport with somebody. There,
Right.
even though they weren't seeing me, they could hear me. They could hear how authentic I was about caring about their situation, right? What is their situation in this case? In that they were describing somebody that they didn't know, or they were dealing with their own insecurities about how they were feeling about themselves, right? Well, we made that connection, whether it was just, from this curtain and they couldn't hear me, but now that they saw me, there was a stronger connection. And so that's what we were doing. And it turned out pretty amazing. One last thing, I got calls from all over the world, and um, the reason I knew that it was a success is I happened to get a call from a fellow officer in my department who I'd known for years, and he happened to see it, and he got pretty emotional because what he said was he had a relationship with his mom. It was a little estranged for the time, and he started realizing that maybe he was a little too hard on her about whatever it was in their lives. And that video, when he watched it, made him feel like he needed to reconnect with her. So, I mean, I'm getting a little emotional just thinking about it right now, but a
Sure.
lot of people were touched by it because they felt, wow, we're really putting some things on ourselves that a lot of people aren't seeing about us. And they actually feel much better about us than we do on ourselves. So it was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I think it was incredible, and you're for people that haven't seen this, it is emotional. I can tell you, I've been able to show that clip to thousands of investigators in some of our training classes, and I play the video, and it's great. It's inspirational. There's a lot of teaching points, but then half the room is almost crying afterwards, and I think, well, now I got to tell a joke or something to get them back.
Exactly.
But it's touching, and I think the when you're talking about walking up at the end for people who haven't seen it is now this person is seeing a sketch that you've done of where they describe themselves versus a sketch you've done where somebody else described them. And at least the ones that they showed, the sketch where somebody else described them appeared superficially more attractive or
Hmm.
more flattering than how they describe themselves. And I think you asked some kind of question like, do you think maybe you're more beautiful than you give yourself credit for than you are? And that's when you see the emotion. And so to translate that to the interview or the communication piece, um, my thought on it, and I'm curious what, obviously from your experience, is if I'm describing myself versus a friend versus an enemy versus somebody who I just witnessed commit a robbery, I probably have some different emotions with that. I'm more critical of myself, I'm more complimentary of a friend, and I'm probably more aggressive about somebody who did something wrong. Is that part of where this difference comes in, and does that translate into an actual sketch interview?
The only thing I could, as you're saying that, I've done many sketches where I was interviewing eyewitnesses to violent robberies or assault with a deadly weapon, and it may sound a little funny, but for the cops out there, it's gallows humor. They're gonna be like, oh yeah, I've heard this kind of stuff. Some of these witnesses were saying, when you guys catch him, can you give him my phone number because they found him very handsome. Um, so so they there's something that the person is going to make a connection on. So to your point about these perspectives, they're going to latch on to something, whether it's they remind me of someone, whether they seen a certain show and that's what they look like. They're going to latch on to that. My job as a forensic artist, interviewer first, is to identify what that is and make sure that I represent it well. Um, One last thing I can say about the interviews itself that I didn't touch on is that it was important for me not to offer any suggestions. if you listen to the interviews itself, I'm just taking the information. That's it. I'm taking it, I'm drawing it, I'm clarifying it, but I'm not necessarily changing the information for what I think it might have been. I'm rolling the dice thinking, okay, my interpretation versus what they're telling me, that's what it's going to be. Because I've already decided before, remember when we first started, that, okay, you're just going to take my perspective. That's it. I'm going to give you what I got, and I'm not going to ask any more other than to clarify. And that's it. So that was
Yeah.
important. I hope people pick up on that, the interviewers in the crowd, to see, to watch how I don't necessarily try to give binary choices in most of the questions that I ask, but I'm really focused just on the information that I'm getting.
That's perfect. And I think to reinforce that point, you've got a. I just flipped to a page in your book because you did a really good job, not just in the book of describing kind of your experience and the research behind it, but you provide a lot of examples of transcripts and actual case studies, which is neat. This is just a short little transcript that I think you created to demonstrate a point. But so the interviewer is asking because they've got some type of crime and maybe other eyewitness reports or police reports suggest that the suspect has a beard, right? So maybe it was me, whatever. They suggest that. So now you, as the interviewer, have this perspective. All right, person must have a beard, and then you wrote this transcript where the interviewer asks the eyewitness, did the suspect have any facial hair? Witness says, I'm not sure, maybe. Well, was it a beard or stubble? I don't know, maybe a light beard. Well, could it have been a week old beard or more like 2 weeks? I don't know, maybe 10 days. Okay, and the color of his beard, probably dark brown. And I'll let you expand on that. But in this section, you're talking a lot about how the person is almost altering their answers to comply with the interviewer versus this kind of free collection of their memory. But maybe you can expand a little bit on that. But I thought that was a
Yeah,
good point you made there.
yeah. I try to. Uh, the transcripts themselves were for like-minded interviewers to kind of look in deep and see, okay, how is he asking questions they can compare to themselves as well, right? But for others, I was trying to illustrate a point about if you have principles as far as the interviews go, and you adhere to those principles, you're not going to get in trouble. So one of the reasons why I brought that one up is I have this idea where that is all there is. TIATI, I call it
Mm-hmm.
TIATI. And if you adhere to that principle, you're not going to ask questions like this particular interviewer did. You're not going to bring your bias because you know you're looking for a certain suspect. Other information came to you where the suspect might have a beard or so forth, right? Stubble. But if you're mindful of that particular interview itself, you're not going to bring that to this particular interview. You're going to leave it alone. You're just going to take whatever information there is. And I talk about after the interview is done, that you can kind of look at the information that you're getting and now figure out whether you have a serial case, whether you have the same person doing this particular crime versus another crime. But when you do your, I would say, investigative solving within the interview itself, you're not doing the eyewitness any favors because you're actually shaping that information. And that benign kind of suggestion about the beard, giving those choices, is pretty dangerous because nowadays we're living in a time where people are being arrested, identified, misidentified about something that they've never done. And unfortunately, for some people in our society, they don't have the same sort of ability to fight the justice system, to get experts in, to pay exorbitant fees for experts to come in and say that they didn't do it and this is why, and have investigators come and help them. They sometimes are just saying, hey, you know what, I've been there, done that before, I'm going to take the plea and get out of here. And they realize later it changes their lives
Yeah.
forever. So that little bit of information that kind of altered that person's actual recollection may turn into something really devastating for an innocent person that's out there. But we never know in the interview when that might happen. So if you adhere to the principles of I'm not going to do this, then you're not worried about whether that's going to happen as a result of your interviews because you're not going down that road.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I know we've both kind of been exposed to and supported some work on the kind of post conviction side, or looking from an expert perspective, or looking at some of the work the Innocence Project has done, and
Yes.
even well intended investigators. If you
Oh,
have
yeah.
eyewitness misidentification is one of the leading causes of wrongful convictions, and it could be an interview like this, or now facial recognition, or a well-intended investigator in good faith might be chasing the wrong path, and simultaneously the actual perpetrator of the crime is still out there, creating more victims. And you talk about that a lot in the book, but I think it's important. That's really part of the concept of why to do this right. I wanted to ask about this TIATI concept, which I think is really
Mhm.
neat and difficult for investigators to somehow or sometimes just kind of separate from. That is all there is, or I need to ask more questions. So I got one more question with that, before as we'll start to wrap up. But if if I do have information, so if I know, let's just say there was a robbery or an active shooter, or whatever it might have been, and the person has escaped, or we're trying to identify the person, and I know based off of maybe video surveillance or other witnesses that the person has a kind of a distinguished scar on their face, or maybe they have a tattoo, or I know that they have an earring or something that's pretty significant, but when I'm talking to an eyewitness, they don't seem to recall that. What is the balance, and maybe there isn't one, between I want to trigger their memory to tell me about that scar or that tattoo, but I also don't want to implant that memory? Is there a right answer to that, or do I just avoid pushing altogether?
Yeah. Well, so I'm coming from two points here. So, you know, I law enforcement officer working in the detective bureau as a forensic artist, right? One of the things that I learned with our detectives is they used to tell me, "Hey, Gil, was this person lying or not?" And I remember, like 10 years before I retired, I was feeling a little uneasy about that. At first, it was more of, "Oh, wow, yes, of course you're relying on me. Of course I'm going to tell you if they're lying or not." And I said to myself, I can't do that because, one day I'm waking up and maybe I'm hungry that day, not feeling good. I see this person, they're a little odd. And now I assume, oh, yeah, they're making it up. So what I did is I uh, looked at the interview itself as a systematic process, and I gave it a kind of a rating system where objectively I could look at that and say, is this information reliable or not? And that's where I started focusing on the information as it was authentically coming to me. So to your point, I would tell detectives, and I talk about this in this book in this one case where I say, utilize me as a resource. And what I mean by that is you think you have some ideas and theories about the case. You can have an objective interviewer now look at this person or talk to them, right? And you can get authentic results from me, getting reliable information from this person. And then you can make the decision later whether you can use that information to substantiate your theories or go in another direction. Or, as we always knew, for those detectives out there working sexual assault cases, we knew there was always this parallel investigation going on. You know, is the person really telling the truth? What's going? We're corroborating everything, and then we're actually looking for the suspect, whoever that suspect is. But that was the nature of those types of investigations. So to your point, when I'm interviewing, and if you're in, let me put it this way, if I'm interviewing and I have this information out there, in the mindful interview method, you are going in with a clean slate. You know that memory is unreliable. You know that there's a possibility that this person did not see everything that you see in other cases. So you only can draw on what they offer you. So to Tiati, that is all there is. Now, can you ask a question about that particular side of the face? Can you gather more information about what distance you were, what time of day it was? questions like that will now inform you later about whether you think that person should have known, should have seen, and could have seen that person. So you can go around that area, but not necessarily say, well, are you sure he didn't have something on his face? Well, you do that, you've just blown it out of the water. You have,
Yeah.
what I think, have jeopardized that investigation, because any, maybe there's some lawyers listening to this show, any qualified lawyer, defense attorney hearing that now could go into court and start poking holes in, weren't you suggesting that information about my client? Didn't you already have a bias about who this might be? And now you altered that information. So it's pretty dangerous. You're going to have to fight the urge to kind of shape that information when it's not there. And as if you look in the book, um, I've shown you time and time again that it can be done. I do it all the time. And I had to actually look back on my cases. I didn't create these interviews when I wrote the book. I actually had to look back on my career and go, wow, let me see what I was doing that seems to be different. One last point. You brought up the detectives. I actually had a case, and it's in the book, where I was interviewing an eyewitness. The detective was in the room listening. I would invite the detectives to sit on my interviews all the time, just so they could see how I'm gathering the information. And this detective was there, and I had a lull in my interview, and I said, go ahead. If you want to ask some questions, go ahead. It's amazing, and you can read about it in the book. But the detective would go on and now ask questions that were actually challenging the eyewitness about
Hmm.
the information they had just given me. It's pretty amazing. And to think that the detective didn't have the awareness to feel that, wow, I'm actually contradicting what she just said to Gil. But he was okay with asking the questions because it was under the idea of investigating. Because what does he have? And I think you were bringing that up. He has information from other eyewitnesses who said something different. So now he's trying to get this eyewitness to kind of agree with what everyone else was saying. But here's the thing, you got to let it go. If this is what she says and this is what she thinks, that's what it is. You can put all the pieces on the board and go, okay, well, maybe this person is more reliable than the other. That's okay. The bottom line is we did get a sketch of the suspect, but there was that interaction between the eyewitness and the detective, and the eyewitness was looking at me like, can you help me? It was pretty
Right.
fascinating to see, and I was able to kind of help along, and kind of reassure that everything was okay. But think about the eyewitness in this situation where here's the police helping her. I was I would do work for other agencies. So this was a detective in another agency. So can you imagine her thinking, wow, are these guys going to actually find this person? I mean, they're kind of going at odds with each other about what I just said. So it was to me demonstrating how we're not being mindful about how we're gathering the information. That was definitely the impetus also for writing the book for me as well.
Yeah, and I think it's very timely because now there's always been an issue, but now it's becoming more widely known. Sexual assault cases, rape cases, where you've got victims and complainants coming forward, and an investigator has this investigator bias or tunnel vision or confirmation bias, where it's almost as if they want to correct the victim or the witness's perspective based on their own theory of the crime versus
Mhm.
letting it live independently. And there's a balance there when the evidence is contradictory, but in this specific space, we're just trying to get information and their information. So I think that's very timely, the teaching point there that you provided. I wanted to give you a chance. I know we talked about the book, so I personally recommend it, the mindful interview method, and I wanted to give you a chance to kind of wrap us up with maybe one last truth, one last takeaway for those that are listening. And if they're interested in more about what you've done and what we're kind of talking about, feel free to let them know how to find you and find information about the book.
Yeah, well, as you can tell, and I want to thank Dave for inviting me. He knows it's my passion. Um, turns out that my managing editor was working on my book with me, and he tells me, "Hey, you need to talk to this guy, Dave." And I was like, "Really?" So we got connected, and I'm so happy that happened, because I feel like we're talking the same. We have passion for helping others to be great interviewers, and so thank you very much for that. So yeah,
I
I
appreciate that.
think I have something in my book here that I think will hopefully be a truth that people can kind of resonate with and kind of think about. So in the book I write in this section called "The Discretion to Search for More," kind of what we were talking about right now. Um, there's a difference between locating and collecting the evidence versus locating and then shaping the evidence to conform to what you believe is evidence that can lead to an identification. We should be mindful of the evidence and collect it as it is, with all the uncertainty that comes with recalling memory events. That doesn't mean we leave it unanalyzed, but if we collect cognitive evidence, mindful of the complexities of memory recall, then we can ensure the process of analysis will be unbiased.
Hmm.
That's what I can leave you
Yeah,
with.
I like that. I think that's, and it really is collective of everything we kind of discussed in our short discussion today. I appreciate your time. I know there's a lot of information we touched on. We could probably talk for hours about this topic. So I encourage people, if you are interested in learning more, not, and you don't have to be an artist to
No,
apply these skills. It's typical everyday communication, and obviously interviewing specifically. I know Gil does a lot of training and speaking now, regardless if somebody's a sketch artist or not, but more on the concept
exactly.
of mindful interviewing. So thanks, Gil. I really appreciate your time and your insight. I look forward to a sketch of me that I can frame in my office with your autograph on the bottom of it soon.
Done.
So
Done. And I want that
perfect.
shirt. I want that shirt
Yeah,
as well.
the shirt's
Let's do
coming to
that.
you. We'll make an even exchange. Well, thanks,
Exactly.
Gil. Thank you all for listening to this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast.
Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And to keep this conversation going, follow the Truth Be Told podcast on LinkedIn and Truth Be Told CFI on Twitter. On behalf of the International Association of Interviewers, Rick Lander-Zalowski, and our valued sponsors, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast.